sometimes it's just those calming words of, "We have you. You're loved and supported. It's okay." It takes a village to raise a child, and honestly, now having walked this path, I feel that the same could be said for taking care of a dying loved one.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Glam Reaper podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Muldowney, aka the Glam Reaper. And on today's episode, we are going back into our doulaship training. We have death doula Nicole joining us here on the podcast to talk all things death doula. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.
We're recording it in the morning, so we're going to say good morning. Everyone's listening to it at whatever points in their life, which is good. So a lot of people like to take us on the road, which I enjoy. We're accompanying them on their long road trips. So Nicole, give us a little bit of a backstory as to who you are and how you came to being on the podcast.
Absolutely. So I am, as you mentioned, I am a death doula. I am non-medical, so I don't even touch a Tylenol bottle. Prior to this calling, because honestly, Jennifer, it is a total calling. I was in human resources, and so for some of your listeners, they might hear Glam Reaper, HR. What a great combination! But I think that my HR background really helped give me a foundation for this work as a death doula, between navigating difficult conversations, sort of documenting processes or plans. That seems to come in handy. I lost my mom and my paternal aunt, both within a pretty close time period. And after taking care of them and being the executor of two estates, I realized that going back to corporate America just was really not going to fill my cup. And I quit my job with literally no plan in place. And lo and behold, about 6 weeks later, I came across an article about a death doula, and everything in it literally spoke to my heart on what I was doing for the past few years. And I reached out and started my training, graduated in July of 2025, and honestly haven't looked back once.
Wow. So you're nearly a year, you're coming up on your year anniversary in it. Very great. And it's interesting when you mentioned HR. I was actually just talking about this with a friend of mine, and actually two separate people, a professional person and a friend of mine, in this past week. And my with the friend of mine, I was just saying how working with people is the best and the worst in the world. So anybody who works in HR, I take off my hat to, because you're choosing to work just with people. Like, I have a business. We're in three, kind of four states at the minute. And it's a lot because you're relying on people to do things that you did. It's a lot of, I'm a bit of a control freak. And it's a lot to have your baby be in the hands of somebody else, right? So there's certain things that I like babysitting, whatever. I mean, I started out managing people. Like, it was one of my first jobs straight out of college when I was 20, managing people. And it's a lot. You're dealing with people. I mean, if you've got a lot of women on your staff every month, or if they're not in cycle, like, and if they are, it's even worse. But like, just people are tired, people's family situations creep in when people are sick, mental health. There's just so much. Every single one of us is so individual, and we bring both the good and the bad of that to work. So managing that is crazy. So yeah, anybody in HR, I'm like, I take off my hat to you. So I feel like the death tool is probably like a vacation for you, no?
It's honestly easier.
Yes.
Easier on a variety of levels, on a variety of levels. Now, do I miss it? Sure, sometimes. I really loved the people, which you have to when you're in HR. I did a lot with leadership training and succession planning, and so there are aspects of it that I miss, but this work definitely fills my heart, just a little bit more.
Okay. And so tell us a little bit about more. At the very beginning, you were very clear you're non-medical. So explain to me and to my listeners, like, what exactly that means for you.
Sure. So it's probably easier to maybe talk about the differences and similarities between birthing doula, because it seems nowadays the United States has finally caught up to other countries, and a majority of people now know what a birthing doula is, whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, not a lot of people have heard what a birth doula is and what we do. And so when a family hires a birth doula, it's typically earlier on in the pregnancy. Mom and doula sit down and work a plan or write out a plan of how we think things are going to go. Death doula, same thing. Ideally, we would be brought in at the time of a terminal diagnosis, but there are people that I'm finding that as they're writing their death plan, they want to make sure that they have that extra level of support and will reach out to a death doula. Birth doula, from a comfort perspective, they put you on an exercise ball. They might massage your feet or apply pressure to your back. Death doula, same thing. I'm certainly not gonna put someone on a birthing ball, but if they need won't try that. Maybe some repositioning, maybe providing pillows in a different spot. Brushing hair, it's something so small that you don't think about that provides that comfort. A birthing doula comes in and is telling mom, "You've got this. One more push, just one more push, you can do it." Now, I'm not going to come in and be a cheerleader at end of life, but sometimes it's just those calming words of, "We have you. You're loved and supported. It's okay."
Mhm.
So, very non-medical. Again, I don't even touch a Tylenol bottle. Now, if there is a client who has not gone on hospice yet, physically I can see that there's some discomfort. I do strongly suggest sometimes, hey, it might be time to call hospice. Dad might need dad might need some assistance with pain to make him a little bit more comfortable.
Mhm. So, explain to me, because I actually was very upset. I didn't get to go to the what was it, Doula Palooza last year. I don't know if you were at that. I was supposed to be at it. I was very upset. And so I had a fabulous Gabrielle, a friend of mine, go to be in my place. I was very upset I didn't get to go because we've had death doulas on this podcast before. And I I have a love-hate relationship with death doulas, right? As in, I I understand their plight and I understand their role, but when I say love hate, it's more love trying to understand rather than love hate, right? There's no hate, there's no even dislike. I think it's actually from my like business marketing background, honestly, that I have just an ick. That's the best way to describe it. Because I can understand where funeral directors get upset with death doulas, right? And so I actually then, while I didn't get to go to Doula Palooza, I was at Terracon recently, and I there was a whole death doula panel, and I got to sort of have a great conversation with some of the death doulas. And so, how do you market yourself, and where do you feel like you fit in the grand scheme of funereal professions? I guess let's go with that.
I think that many doulas focus on what their passion is, and that's kind of where they have their specialty or how they market themselves. So for me, I have an immense passion for legacy work. So you get a terminal diagnosis, your loved one gets a terminal diagnosis. It is mass chaos, rightfully so, and there's things that families aren't thinking about in the moment as far as what do I want my dad's legacy to be? What stories would my mom want to be able to pass down to future generations. So for me, I have a super strong passion for the legacy work, whether that's documenting stories. There's some apps that I use that I think are just fantastic in working with families to kind of document legacies. And I've also purchased a bunch of camera equipment, lights, and microphones to do legacy reels or legacy interviews. So, for example, just sat down with my in laws about a month or so ago, and I've known them for 20. something years and knew bits and pieces of their origin story. And so I wanted to sit down and learn the whole story of mm, dating and how did they know they wanted to get married? When did they decide they wanted to start a family? And that way, that's something that I'll be able to pass down to my kids and they'll have it to pass down to their children. So, as far as where we fit, sometimes I really just think it depends on what that doula brings to the table.
Yeah, because therein, I think therein lies both the beauty and the potential and the opportunity, but also the confusion. I think, and I genuinely think this for both the funeral professions that are currently in the business and also for families looking for services, right? And we'll get to that. Because for me, my understanding of a birthing doula is crystal clear. That, I bring them in at a certain point, they take me through the process, I end up with a beautiful, healthy baby boy, and sort of that's it. And I haven't had any kids, but it's clear in my head, right? Whereas a death doula, I think because there's so many different varieties, and as you said, death doulas, because they choose to focus on what their passion is, that can lead into people being very confused. Like for me, for example, for me and my own business, we are celebrants and we are memorial planners. We are not funeral directors. We are not death doulas. Um, so I've worked with a myriad of funeral directors and death doulas who all think that they are celebrants and think they are memorial planners and think that they are in each category both. It's not to say that they're not or they are not qualified to be. And qualification is a whole other topic which we will not get to today, unfortunately. But hopefully sometime soon because I debate hard with some of my fellow funeral professionals on this. And that's again the wonderful thing about human nature is we're all different. We all have these opinions and these thoughts. And so
Absolutely.
yeah, and so I love to just talk about this because I did actually ask a death doula at Terracon, and I said, what exactly is a death doula? And she did answer honestly, and she said, "You know what?" She said, "I can't fully answer that because it is such a myriad of things." So I think therein lies the issue, and I don't know how we solve it. Do we solve it? Maybe we don't. I don't know. I just know the funeral directors, like when I first started in the business, and I'm in it nearly 20 years, which is actually bonkers, and I'm aging myself. But when I first started, funeral directors were like, whoa, whoa, she's coming for our business. She's coming for our jobs. And I'm like, no, 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 I am not. And we've slowly but surely established that we're good, mostly because I'm very crystal clear that I stick to my lane and they stick to theirs and that's it. Okay, a question. How do you feel about a death doula who has never been with or touched a dying/dead body? If you've never been with a dying or deceased person, how can you call yourself a death doula? Like, are you an apprentice? Right? You're an apprentice death doula. Fine. You haven't maybe had the experience. But and this is, again, this is my opinion because there is no law dictating any of this. And I know there's courses and I have best friends who are death doulas. So, we've had these feisty conversations and I love it. It's what life is about. It's just to me, it's a very because I've had death doulas recommend me as a celebrant or as a memorial planner to come in and do that part of it. And they've actually said to me, they've like, this is my first one. I don't really know what I'm doing. And I've had to end up sort of walking them through what I do and
Oh, goodness.
yeah, and I've had to walk them through sort of what at least what I bring to the table. Again, because I'm not going to tell you what a funeral director, I can tell you, but like it's to me, it's up to each. I do believe there's a seat for all of us at the table. By the way, this isn't about that at all. I'm very, there's a seat for everybody at the table, and we all have goods to bring. It's just I think one of the issues with death doula ship, whatever we want to call it, is finding its place. And maybe it needs to be split up.
I have 3 children, and there's the old adage of "It takes a village to raise a child," and honestly, now having walked this path, I could I feel that the same could be said for taking care of a dying loved one. It takes a village. It's there's so much to navigate, and for individuals who want to die at home on hospice, sometimes, depending on where you live and depending on resources, hospice only comes in once or twice a week. And so then, 95% of end of life caregiving falls to loved ones. And so, to your point, we have a place. And I do think it's that extra set of hands to have a seat at the table for that. Maybe around respite care, right? Hey, Sally, you've been sitting bedside vigil with your mom for hours and hours. Why don't you go just grab a cup of coffee,
Yep.
go jump in the shower, where I think, a death doula can provide that break.
Yeah. And I do agree with you on that. Like, so to me, if you were to ask me what I think a death doula is, it's exactly as I perceived a birthing doula to be. It is somebody who sits with the deceased and the dying and their families and helps and holds the hand and encourages. And, you kind of touched on it earlier and is the cheerleader. There is actually, it's a show, I haven't watched it. Like, she has a great conversation with the woman, and the woman, she's bringing a comedic value. And I think that's exactly what a death doula is. And that's, I feel like if death doulas focused on that part of it, I genuinely think this would be a more beautiful marriage of professions. I think the issue is when, again, for me, my opinion, I think the issue is when death doulas claim to be lawyers, or and help people with legal work and paperwork, and maybe even videography, honestly, and then the celebrant side of it. And then sometimes they're planning the funeral, and then sometimes they're helping with the catering. They're just in everything. And I do have, I said like a bitch coming at this, but I do have a potential sort of, I think, why this happens. But just before to finish kind of this point is, I just think it would be a more beautiful um marriage of all these professions if we all just stuck to our lane to a certain degree, right? Like, you might turn to me, as people have online, when I say this, because I've been known to say, you're not the Cheesecake Factory, you can't do everything great. Anyway, so I think that would be a better thing. And I have the same ethos, the same thought about water cremation. I think water cremation, there's so many different types of it out there, higher temperatures, lower temperatures, longer time, things like that. That here's the thing, you and I know what we're talking about. The consumer, the average consumer hasn't a clue. And as we both know, they're making decisions fairly quickly if it's at need, right? So, my whole thing is like, if I need a death doula, like, how am I finding you guys? Like, what am I looking up? If I put in death doula, Nicole, I'm finding all sorts of people who are gonna who may have never even been with the deceased body. I Again, just my opinion. But if you're a death doula or want to be death doula out there, my suggestion to you is spend some time in hospice. I have even spent time in hospice, and I don't deal anything with body. I don't deal with the deceased person really at all. Spend some time in hospice, spend some time around the dying. It will change your life irrevocably, no matter what whether you decide never to kind of go forward with this. Am I right? Like, it's, ooh, yeah, it's so rewarding. Actually, tell us a little bit, just before I get to the point about the why. Tell us your first experience with a non-family deceased person or dying person.
Honestly, my first job at 15, I worked at a nursing home and I did the laundry. And so I would walk there every day in the summer, go down to the basement, do the laundry, fold the laundry, bring it upstairs to the main living quarters. And I'd be walking down the hall with all of my carts and laundry baskets. And as I'm walking past certain rooms, the first few times it kind of I was naive, let's just put it that way. I would walk past a room and look in, and there is a sheet pulled totally up over someone's head. And again, I was 15, 0 exposure to death at that point. "Oh, Sally must be sleeping in this morning." My hair was much blonder back then, so I'll play the dumb blonde card. And it took me a few times before I realized, "Oh, they're no longer with us." And you would think at that age it would terrify me that I'm in such close proximity, and it didn't. And then fast forward a few years after that, we were with my paternal grandmother shortly after, she died. We were in there for last rites when she was still breathing, and moments later, there was some in and out, and she did pass. A year after that, my paternal grandfather was in a hospice house and, died, and I immediately rushed to be there and just sat in the room with him, and
Yeah.
he was already gone. And again, I was very young, Jennifer. I was 21, 22, and it was
Mm.
very peaceful because, I still sat there and talked to him like he was here because it just felt like the right thing to do. And so I think from a very early age, I was just sort of exposed and drawn to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a calling, and that's what I do think anybody in this business, I think, well, to a certain degree, unless you've grown up in it and, whether it's funeral home or business being handed down to you, a lot of times you don't get a choice, which is, not great either. But I think for those of us that choose to come into this, I think it's definitely a calling. At 15, I worked in a bar as an Irish person does, called the morgue. Seeing dead bodies there to God, but it was called morgue. Actually went there recently with my family for dinner, but it's always funny to go back. Yeah, I do think that that's the tragedy for me is it is such a calling, and I want to keep all these wonderful death doulas that are out there that have hearts of gold and that are doing this. And so when I'm coming at it so fiercely, it's not from it's more from a place of how can we find a seat at the table for everybody? How do we make this space? What does this look like? Because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, the landscape of funeral service is changing. It's slightly changing, but it's changing. And so how do we make space for everybody, and how do we make this work? And back to sort of trying to not sound like a complete bitch. I personally think the reason why death doulas go into such a myriad of different areas around the actual sitting with the deceased and the dying and the family is because of finances, honestly. I think it's because of finances. At the end of the day, every single one of us need some form of compensation to live in this country. This is not a cheap country to live in. Doesn't matter who you are. Some of us are blessed with people. I say us, I don't know why I'm saying us, but some of us are blessed by maybe having a partner that can take care of things or a family that have left them. So some people can kind of come into this in a very voluntary role. Great. For the majority of us, that's just not feasible. Right. So now you've got this position that is your passion and you're really good at, but it's getting paid for it. And the one struggle I seem to encounter whenever I talk to death doulas is how do they charge for their work? It's such heart-centered work. I mean, what I do is very heart-centered work, but I have learned and I've changed and evolved over the last 2 decades in how I charge. And I think that's probably why. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the rise in doulas is not so much that people have been doing this forever and now are just getting paid. I think there is a huge shift in our healthcare expectations and what healthcare is able to do for our loved ones that are approaching end of life. Let's be honest, we have this silver wave, as they call it now, where the boomers are aging fast and experiencing significant declines in their health, and I just don't know if the healthcare system is able to fully support them in the way that they need care at end of life. And so I think you're seeing a lot of people like myself who had significant loss and we were those end of life caregivers seeing this gap between the hospital system, hospice, healthcare or what have you. And after witnessing that, at least for me, I felt this pull of I wanna give families better than what I had. And that's not saying that hospice for either of my loved ones missed the mark, because they didn't. But, when I talk about the fact that I'm super passionate about legacy work from the HR perspective, I'm also very passionate about those difficult conversations. And so I had 2 different very polarizing experiences with my mom and my aunt. My mom and I did not have the white picket fence growing up, and there was a lot of things that probably needed to be aired out and resolved. And so for her, the dying process looked very different. It was full of agitation and crying out for her mom, and versus my aunt, my paternal aunt, where it was as peaceful as death can be, but there were no unsaid conversations. We had taken care of that all throughout our lives together, but my mom and I never got to reconcile that. And so I also kind of see that is a bonus for what I do. Is if there's things that haven't been cleared up and you just don't know where to begin, that's another space that I like to come in and try to bring those family members peace as much as humanly possible. That sometimes I think a regular nurse just isn't equipped to do, nor has the time, right? They might have 14 other patients and can't have that moment to just sit and help the family navigate through, again, some of those challenging conversations.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end it. Thank you so much, Nicole, for coming on. We are a big fan of death doulas. We just need to find the seat, if that's again my opinion, at the table. But I just think absolutely death doulas are part of the future of funeral professionals. And yeah, and thank you so much for joining us on the show. This was amazing.
Oh gosh, thank you, and don't worry, I did not think you were being bitchy at all. I mean, listen, there's enough people dying right now to go around, and to your point, we all have a space, and we all fill a gap and fill a need, and so it's really just being able to provide care, dignity, and showing up when we need to.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Nicole. We look forward to watching this space with you.